Let's make a patchwork zine as a no-sew journal, and I'm also going to show you how I decorated it. Hey, it's Meg, welcome back to my channel. So I'm going to be making this patchwork journal and I'm using just a sheet of around about A4 size paper as a base for this. So this is just giving me a way to make sure that I'm sort of staying within that size when I'm actually constructing this zine. So the base of it will be a mishmash of all different papers. So if you've ever made one of the concertina, like accordion fold no-sew journals before, this is essentially the same method. It's almost a bit like a masterboard, I suppose, that I'm creating, but I'll be using all these different papers. So I've got like book papers, I've got brown papers, all sorts of different bits and pieces. I've added like some washi tape to this as well, and I just wanted it to be an eclectic mix of papers that I could have as my background for this. So I originally, when I wanted to do a zine for the No Sew journal, I just used some card, just some like white cardstock, and started working on it. And I just thought, this doesn't feel like collagey enough. Like it didn't feel quite how I normally work in my journals. And I realized it was because I wasn't actually making the pages out of, just all sorts of random bits of paper. And so when I then started adding papers onto it, with the way that you fold a zine, it then got really, really like chunky and sort of a bit awkward to fold. So I decided to go for this method instead and use this as a way to be able to create my own sheet of paper almost to then be able to fold into the zine. And just by clipping the first piece of paper to my guide sheet of paper, this made it really easy because you know me, I don't like to measure anything. So look at that, I've got a perfect measured sheet of paper without actually having to do any of that. I didn't have to trim any of the papers because I knew how big I wanted the sheet to be. So if you just want to make one little zine like this, then that's a really easy way that you can just create a sheet that's exactly the size that you need. And I found it really easy to work with and to add all my papers. So once I had the sheet the size that I wanted it, I then added a few extra layers, but I made sure that they were thinner papers. So like the doily that I added that was quite thin, and then also I picked something from this sort of giant washi sticker book almost, and used that as a way to add some interest that didn't add a lot of bulk. So I think that's why washi tape was good for this as well. So I think my goal with this really was just to give me something to respond to on a page, which I think is something that I really like to work with. Whether it's my junk journals or my altered book, I just think having something already on the page and having something to respond to really helps to get rid of that fear, I think, of the blank page. So I then started working on the prompts for this week of the challenge of No Sew November. So I think we have a really good week of prompts this week, and the first one that I'm starting with is continue. So what I decided to do was grab some of my stamps that have a more like abstract pattern to them, or you can kind of use them in that way. And I just decided to use a few of them and sort of like continue the pattern across the whole page. So you'll notice like I haven't cut and folded this into the actual journal yet. So this is sort of allowing me at this point to still work on this as a whole, and I'm not sort of looking at it in terms of the individual pages. Like I can kind of picture where they might be, but I just wanted to do my stamping before that so that you kind of then had the stamping where it would kind of go across like two different pages and things like that. So once I'd done that, I then started folding my paper into a zine, which is a really easy fold that you can do. And you've probably made zines before, but just in case you haven't, all you need to do is fold the piece of paper in half long ways and then also the opposite way as well. And then when your paper is horizontal, you also need to fold the paper inwards so that you split it into four, and this gives you 8 sections across your paper, as you can see that I've got here. Then you'll want to fold it in half and cut down the middle, but you only want to cut halfway, as you can see that I've done there for the fold. And then you just fold it in on itself like this. And with it being the patchwork papers, I found, and you might find as well, it's a little bit tricky to sort of get the papers to sit the way that you want to. Like, they might not want to fold that way, so you just have to sort of go through each of the pages and just sort of like reinforce the fold. Now, this won't be like a completely perfect journal. There will be a little bit of wonkiness, a little bit of imperfection, but I actually quite like that. And you see like bits of papers peeking through and stuff, so I just decided to embrace that. So now I'm working on the next prompt of circle, and when I got my stamps out, because I haven't used stamps in quite a while, it feels like. So once I had the box out and I was just sort of looking through what I wanted to use, I remembered I have this sort of circular, almost like a bit of a motif stamp, and I believe that this was from Action. I picked it up when I was in the Netherlands. It was something silly like 90 cents or something, and I just thought that would be perfect because it's such a versatile, pattern. I could do like little journaling inside it and things like that, and I thought that this would be a great way to introduce that circle to the page. So I'm using this as the journal like lied flat just because that's a lot easier to work on, but this piece here is actually the cover of the journal itself, like the front page. So I decided to use the circle as the front cover, and then I'm just using some white acrylic paint here to push back the areas that are around the circle, and in this way it kind of helps the actual circle itself to stand out a little bit, but not in a way that's really bold. Like, it's a lot more subtle the way that it's standing out. And I think it's something that fits with the colour scheme that I've got going on for this journal. And I think that's actually a pattern that I ended up carrying through a lot of this zine, was to be a lot more subtle and almost let the patchwork collage that I'd created for this zine to shine through. So I didn't want to like cover up a lot of stuff. I didn't want to overpower it. I really wanted to work with it and make design choices that would complement the papers that I had chosen, because I really liked the way that they all sat together. You know me, I love my neutral tones, but I just really liked the greenery there from the foliage, so I wanted to think of a way that would help it to stand out and almost enhance it, I suppose. So I decided to use a rub-on here to add the text onto this, because I thought about using my brush pen. Like, I love using a brush pen for some wording, but I did want something that was a lot more subtle. So I used this little rub-on, as you can see here, in like a sort of script font. And then I also used it as a way to add some little extra embellishments to the design of the stamp. So I was kind of integrating that, and I had some little flowers and leaves coming off that as well. And these are by the brand MU. But as I say, I didn't want to overpower this too much, and so I did keep the design fairly simple and let the intricacies of what was already on the page kind of speak for itself. I did come in with my white pen here just to add some extra detailing and a bit of highlighting, just because I thought that the pop of white would look quite nice around the edge of the circle. And I'm just using my Uniball Signo to do this. I also added a few little dots as well as some detail because I just love to do that on my pages. I think it adds a nice little touch, and you can see there I've created quite a subtle like front cover for this little zine, and I kept this in because I did toy with the idea of having like some stamped lettering on the front. I have this Enjoy Today stamp, and you'll see I stamped it on like some cream cardstock and thought about adding it to the front, but I'm not quite sure whether it actually fits. So I'd love to know, what do you think? Should I have kept that on the front cover, or do you think that this is enough as it is? I actually quite like it. I think it's quite sweet. It's a lot more toned down than some other things that I normally do, but I still think it has that level of detail. So for the next prompt of transition, this was another one of those prompts where I really had to think about what I was going to do. And I decided just to add some tissue paper. So this is like a sort of autumnal design, and I thought that I could just do a bit of a nod to, like, autumn as the transitional season, especially because this is like the no one of the November journals that I'm doing. And so I had some areas here of this white grid paper that kind of stuck out a little bit with all of the cream and brown paper that I had on the zine. So I decided to add them over that and over the tracing paper as well, and I think that they blended in really nicely on these sections and just added a nice touch of some colour and also some visual interest as well. So the next prompt I had was fuse, and again, this is one of those quite tricky prompts where you have to sort of think a bit about what you're going to do. And I did go with another abstract sort of way of going about this, and I decided to kind of fuse some of the papers that I had together by just adding some stenciling across areas of the zine that had a few different papers. So that's kind of how I approached that. And like I said, the whole idea of like prompts don't have to be a whole specific page. I'm really leaning into that, and I think that's helping me just to like carry on and move on to the next part of the journal, which is adding this clear or like translucent tip in. So I thought it would be fun to add a tip in into a zine, especially because it's that kind of layout where you can also, unfold the journal as well. So I thought it would be nice to play with the additional pages. And I also thought that it would be good for the prompt of expand, because by adding the tip in to the journal, I'm expanding the space that I have to work on in it. And I thought that it would be nice to add a translucency for this, just because, again, I didn't want to detract from the patchwork collage that I'd already done. I was quite enjoying the way that it was already looking, so I wanted something that would complement that. And what I ended up doing was sellotaping that to the page itself so it didn't stand out, and then I used this botanical image here and a few other bits of collage just to create a bit of a cluster that kind of floated on top almost. I mean, it wasn't completely like transparent, like, if I'd used a bit of plastic or something like that, but you still had that translucency, so it gave a bit of a ghosting effect almost, and it did feel like it was lifted from the page, but it did also give that feeling of, I've expanded the journal and added an extra element to it. And like, it's always fun to add a tip in to a journal and add more space to create on. And translucent ones as well are often really fun to write across with a white pen. That's something you can do to add a really interesting effect to a page. But I was feeling for this journal in particular that it was more art journally, in the sense that I wasn't adding a huge amount of text to this. I was really focusing on the collage element and just building up all of the different visual interest. And as you can see here with the sellotape, using this made the tip in not like stand out. So if I'd have used washi tape, there would have been a bit more of like a harsher divide between the tip in and the zine itself, whereas this really makes it feel like it's part of the journal itself. And so I then came in with my brush lettering pen for the prompt of mosaic. So I actually decided that there was enough sort of collaging and things going on the pages. Like, I did really enjoy the way that they were looking. So instead of adding like more stuff to it, I decided to kind of pivot almost and, turn to quotes and how the words could relate to those for the prompts that I was doing. So the prompt of mosaic, I just added a few words here that kind of spoke to the prompt. And, even though this was, not as involved as making like a full page, I still think that having this brush lettering here on the brown paper, like the space that was created on this little page for the text, I think had a lot of impact, and it really stands out amongst everything else going on and is that like focal point. Like, you don't always have to have loads of imagery and like, all the bells and whistles on a page. Like, you can have things that are a lot more simple, and sometimes they're the things that I actually really enjoy the most. Like, I really like the way that this page looks. Like, you have all those collage bits already built up, and the tissue paper came across from one of the other prompts that I was doing for this journal. So I just decided that the quote was enough for that prompt and for that page, and like I didn't need to overdo it. Like, sometimes I worry that I'm adding like too much to a page sometimes, and it's kind of hard to know when to actually stop, like when is something finished. And I felt like I was reaching that point a little bit with this journal. So you'll see here I added like a little stamp and some scribbles here with my white pen, because I was looking at that brown paper and I was thinking, this is a gap. I should add something. But then I thought, no, actually, I need to just allow some of that negative space to almost speak for itself and like have that breathing room on the page. And having those areas of negative space against an area that has a lot of detail, the way that you have that contrast is actually what makes those areas of detail look a lot better. So they kind of complement each other. So I think that's what I'm learning with when I'm putting layouts together and pages together, that having that breathing room is what helps the areas of detail and everything else to shine on the page, or on the zine masterboard, whatever you want to call it, that we are creating here. All I know is that it was just a really fun format to work in for this no sew journal. So again, with the sort of creating space, I did decide to add a little tag here so that I had some blank space to work on for this quote. And this was a quote that I picked for the prompt of drift. And rather than doing like a bold lettering quote, I decided to use a Unipin fine liner. I think this is in sepia or dark brown or grey, it might be, but it's a colour that I think really complements the brown tag really well. And I just decided to like handwrite it just with my handwriting. Not the neatest, but I think that sometimes having that like block of text can look really good against other bits of collage that you have going on. So I just decided to underline the last bit that I really liked from this quote, and you can see there that's how it turned out. So I didn't need something like huge impact for that. It was just a bit of handwriting that I added, and sometimes that's all it needs to be. So this is the final patchwork zine no sew journal that I created for the third week of no sew November. So I hope you're enjoying the prompts so far, and maybe you might want to make a little zine for one of your no-sew journals for some of the prompts for this challenge. I'd love to hear what your favourite prompt from this week is and what you've been creating for the prompts in your journal. But thank you so much for watching. As always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.